Hey, good people. Davia here, and welcome to another episode of Tales from the Shaker, Davia Williams Stevenson podcast. One of the things I love about being able to do this is talking to people and hearing their change stories, their pivot stories. I love a reinvention story. That's the premise, right, of Tales from the Shaker. The artist, the guest is, well, you're an artist.
Mm-hmm.
The guest is a mover and shaker in their own life, sphere of influence. The shaker is also any kind of event or incidents that cause them to learn a new thing, try a new thing, find a new passion, a purpose, whatever. And so I'm excited to speak with you today. We met some years ago in a different capacity,
Yes,
and it's been fun kind of watching you evolve. And I know you're still moving. It's going to be fun to see where you're going. So I'm going to read a little bit about what she's doing. She is a mixed media. Elle is a mixed media and collage focused artist in Westerville, Ohio. Elle has traveled a winding road toward being an artist. She has long loved crafting, photography, beginning with her first 110 meter. What do you say? Is it
millimeter?
110 millimeter film camera, music and books filled with imaginative characters, especially science fiction. That's cool. Elle has always had a love for people watching, and much of her art has sprung from her daily observations. Now an empty nester with lots of time to create, Elle has grown to love a variety of mediums, including watercolor, acrylics, pastels. Her art is multi-layered, often raw and textured, as is the human experience. So I'm super excited to just travel that journey with you, your art journey with you.
Sure.
So we'll start with some basic stuff.
Okay.
So I know that you've been married for a number of years to your husband. How long have you been married?
22 years.
22 years. Is he also creatively inclined? Is this a language he can relate to?
He said he couldn't at first, but he has sort of begun to dabble in paint pours, and he actually makes bracelets.
Okay.
So he's
I don't know
doing
why
his
I didn't
thing.
expect to hear that.
Yeah.
I know with my husband and I'm not an artist, but I love all things art. I used to do performing arts. I would sing and do drama. And I remember the first time he came to one of my performances in college. He came up later and he says, "Wow, people seem to really enjoy that. Great job." He didn't know. And now he's really the force behind the art we have in our home. He loves to go to theater. We have 2 boys who are creative.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to see how I've bled into his experience. I would say enriched his experience. So it's neat to hear that your husband, he's even picked up some visual artist type of things. That's really neat. And I know you have one son who I knew before you.
Yes, you did.
He and my youngest son are good friends.
They are.
He calls me Mom Davia, which I love. So, and 2 grandkids. He's a father of 2. So that's really neat to see life move on. So your nest is empty, but I imagine it gets filled with those 2 little ones every now and then.
It does. Yeah. It's been quite the experience because having a boy is quite different than having girls. Yeah. And 2 has added to the fun.
Yeah. Similar story. 2 boys. I have a granddaughter, so a toddler as well. So fun stuff. Fun to see. Just life continues on.
Yes, it does.
Continues on, right? Yeah. So what's your day job?
Well, I work in patient relations. Okay. I go solve the world problems of the hospital locally here in Columbus. Okay. It's my daily job. Okay. It's I have quite the interesting role, and for the introvert that I am, it requires me to be an extrovert 8 hours a day. So
yeah, and you're in the midst of, like you said, problem solving. So you're dealing with a population who's in the hospital.
I am.
Not usually at your best when you're in the hospital.
No.
There's usually some anxiety or what have you. The people around you are demanding, and I can imagine what that's like.
Yeah, they are. It's an interesting climate in healthcare right now in general, and hospitals have their own challenges, and I'm sort of there to help us meet the challenges when it relates to patient relationships.
I love that you do that.
Yeah.
That's important. Having been a patient many times, we've sometimes needed help navigating the system, navigating the language, those kinds of things. So I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm stalling for some reason. I just really want to dig into this art.
Okay.
Before we sat down and got mic'd, you brought a few pieces for us to look at.
I did.
And I just love them. There's a series in particular. What is there a name for that series?
It's untitled right now. It's swirling around. I'm waiting on it to tell me what it wants to be called.
Okay. Let's tap into that a little bit. Your creative process.
Sure.
You said you're waiting for it to tell you what it wants to be called. How do you hear that? What happens when you start a new piece?
Yeah, so, I tend to get a lot of different ideas that I download into either a sketchbook or my phone as an app. And a lot of times the story will sort of be swirling around in my head, like, oh, okay, like today I have this piece I'm going to do about hoarding, for instance. And so I don't know what it's going to look like or anything, but I know that when I sit down, it will just come to me. And it's usually in a quiet space. I'm sitting there with my art supplies and a pencil. And, at some point it just shows up in my head. And I've always just accepted it as a God wink or a God download. And so that's sort of how it shows up for me. I just let that process. To me, when it's forced, it doesn't work quite as well. So I really only know how to accept it intrinsically, however it shows up in my head or my heart. So when it decides it wants to name itself, it will.
So it's almost a narrative process for you. It's like you hear a story or a person or a perspective or something. There's some sort of it's almost like context comes to you before the image.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow.
Yeah, it's always a matter of sometimes me, because I listen a lot. I would say that's one of my skill sets is that I'm a good listener. And so I usually try to being an empathetic person requires that you maybe listen in a different way than other people do. And so you want to actually hear what it is they're saying, because a lot of times you'll get to the root of what the actual issue is when maybe they didn't even know what the issue was. And so for me, those conversations kind of stay with me, and they sort of become art on their own. Like I don't usually know what I'm going to do. But when I sit down and I myself am finally still, that's when it sort of shows up like, okay, this is what this piece is going to be about. And then it just flows.
That is so neat to me. I have such an appreciation for art, but I don't make anything.
Sure.
I mean, I will read, I'll perform, I'll used to sing. That's gone. You don't use it, you lose it. But I do remember a time when I felt like I should be able to create. I would see things and I would try to sketch.
Sure.
And what was in my mind didn't look anything like what showed up. I didn't have a talent to nurture.
Sure.
I believe, I say all the time that, I believe that we're created and we're given gifts and talents. And we don't know that. We come here with them, but we don't know that.
That's
we
true.
Discover them later. And then it's up to us to nurture them. That's not what I'm going to do.
Okay.
Like, at this point, I don't think that was coming.
Understood.
I think that was not. So when did you discover that you had an interest, a tendency, and then a talent for creating art?
I think back about, for instance, when I was in high school, I didn't think I was good at art. There used to be like comic book contests where if you drew this turtle, his name was Tippy, and you sent it in, you could win like thousands of dollars. And I said, let me try it one time. It looked nothing like it was supposed to. So I gave that up as a dream. But then somewhere I stayed in the corporate world for my career for a long time. And I started doodling during meetings. So I would say that's kind of how a shift started to happen. And I ended up going back to this college. I decided I wanted to get a degree in graphic design. I felt like I had an interest in building websites and things like that. But then when I started I took some classes at the community college just to sort of, I don't know, let me see how this will work out before I jump into like with the big fish. And I found myself in classes that required some drawing skill that I absolutely did not have. And so I look back at some of my sketchbooks now because I kept the ones that I was graded on, and they'd be like, great attempt. And so, I knew that I was accomplishing the mission of the assignment, but I was not accomplishing the mission. And I'd look around at my peers and like, my drawing doesn't sit anywhere in the same room as these other people. So I gave it up. Fast fast forward to COVID, I did kind of continue to doodle a little bit during meetings and stuff. Still just, I don't know, somewhere in the back of my brain, I just really wanted it to work out. I felt like it could. And perhaps I just wasn't learning it the way it was being taught to me.
So were you taking classes?
No, I stopped.
Okay.
Yep. So I stopped, but I would keep trying. And so I had all these little journals and such. And then when the pandemic happened and everything shut down, I actually committed to attempting to draw every day. And it was happened simultaneously with something called the 100-Day Project, which is a project that happens around the world. It's international, and people commit to just trying one thing, even if it's 1 or 2 minutes a day for 100 days.
So anything, it's not just art.
No, it could be photography. It could be write a haiku. It could be sing a song. It could be anything. People have so many different types of projects that they tried, but I decided that that would be mine. So because there was nothing else to do, I'd go sit in my little studio. And I would try to draw something every day. And then eventually I started posting it on Instagram because it finally started to look like what I said it was going to be in my mind. And so when that happened, I just sort of continued to pursue it. And then suddenly people were saying, "Are you selling that?" I hadn't really thought about it that way. I really was just trying to put myself out there. I was trying to connect with other people. And suddenly it began to continuously look like what I was going for. And that's when I felt like, okay, the shift finally happened. I felt like it was there all these years, but it just, I don't know. It wasn't showing up until I stopped trying to be so technical about it and doing it the way that the teachers were trying to tell me it had to be done.
So your art is very much inspired. Like you said, you get a download story. You said, as I read in the bio, that you're an observer of people. And you've referred to yourself as an introvert a few times, but you live in a very extroverted world.
I do.
So when I hear you talk about putting yourself out there, putting your sketches on social media, starting to get feedback, positive feedback that was encouraging, I'm trying to understand what made you decide to put yourself out there. Like, are you aware? And sometimes we're not aware, but are you aware of a thing that said, let me try to put it out there?
No, I think really it was about the communities that I was making on the internet. So even before the 100-Day Project, I had attempted something called Inktober, where you draw for the whole month of October in ink. So I tried that the month before, and I did pretty okay with that.
I think I remember that. I think I saw that on social media.
Yeah, and people would be like, "I didn't know you could draw," and I'd be like, "I can't." I was just that I decided they gave us a topic, and so all I have to do is rise to the topic. That's all I had to do for Inktober. I didn't have to think of anything. And so I felt like that went well. But then when you're part of Inktober in those communities, you really do have to post it so that you'll engage with other people. Sure. Sometimes all my feedback wasn't positive. Some of it was negative, and I wouldn't even call it negative. I would say it was helpful. Like I was drawing squishy foreheads for the longest. And one of my friends that I met online said, "Hey, I think your women would look a lot better if you gave them more space for their foreheads. I think you're missing something in that." And it was like an aha moment. Like, oh, that is what I need to do. And so finally I got the foreheads right, at least. So, you learn a bit from connecting with people on the internet. And I think that's the space that I needed. It wasn't a grade. But it was like an opportunity to get help where you might need it. And only there, right? Like no one's critiquing like, oh, it doesn't look like I would draw it.
That's good. That's a good point. And then there's that, I don't know what you want to call that space that the internet allows, that social media allows. It can feel intimate, but it's cloaked. Right?
Sure.
There's a disinhibition that comes from that. You don't have to face that person. So it's not personal.
Nope.
But it can be at times intimate.
It can.
That's neat. I like hearing stories with this medium that's not going anywhere.
Not
when it is beneficial. So much we hear about all of the hate speech and the criticism, and because there's no face. You can say all kinds of things you may not have the courage to say in person.
You can.
And so it's nice when you don't have those guardrails, but your feedback is encouraging or promotes growth or community.
Oh, sure.
So I'm glad that you found a space there. Yeah. Well, I don't think you have a squishy forehead problem anymore. I really love your art, and it's been fun to watch, as I have from a distance, watch it start to evolve to such now that you have a studio.
I do have a studio.
So tell me about that and how that became, how you went from a person who was discouraged about producing art, I'm not any good at this, to I think I'm going to have a place, a permanent place. So do you work there as well, or you just display there?
No, I work there. I go and I sit in there and create for hours. I mean, it genuinely is my happy place. Like the sun, it's a very well lit place. But a little backstory about how I landed there. With the last 100-day project I did in 2022, a gallery owner reached out to me and said, "Have you ever considered showing your work?" Now, there's a lot of scams going on Instagram, and they attack whomever. They come after artists like, "I really love your work," and figure out a way for you to send them money some sort of way. So when I first saw it, I was like, no, I haven't ever thought about that. And who are you? So I ended up having a whole full out conversation with the person, and she was telling me that they were having exhibits for emerging artists on a regular basis. And she said, would you consider it? Why don't you come to this exhibit that's happening on this particular Friday? You'll get a chance to see what it's like, and then you can decide. So I said, okay, sure. So grabbed my husband and grabbed another artist friend, because I'm like, I don't know what I'm walking into, but let's go see. So we went, and it was a really glorious place. I couldn't imagine that I was going to do it, but luckily I had already been doing the 100-day project. So I was able to, I did say yes to her, and I shifted my 100-day project to being a setup for that exhibit. And so I ended up having the exhibit in June of 2022. And it was such a success that it startled me. I had a sense that I had been getting a following over time, but I wasn't expecting the people to put their dollars to it, right? So, I mean, I literally couldn't believe like how that turned out. Like I had so many people show up for it. They told me it was a record-setting number at the time. And people bought my art, and then it was just like, okay, so now what am I going to do with all the art that didn't sell? Because mind you, I was doing the 100-day project. I had 100 pieces, and then I actually created other pieces to add to the show because the place was so big. I needed to fill the walls. So I probably had 150 ready to go, but I had 85 ready to show. And so once the show came down, I had to bring it all home, and I didn't have anywhere to put it. Yeah. So I started this. They have studios at the mansion. Yeah, it's called the Mansion 731, but they have studios there. And originally I thought I wanted a studio by myself. But then I ran into this group of women called the Daylight Artists Collective. One of their artists at the time had a site called Columbus Women Artists. And so she started following me. And then eventually, long story short, she added me to her list of people that she reached out to. And then they invited me up to their studio. And when I walked in, I'm like, oh, this is a community studio? Like there's 8 people here. Okay. Then I'm thinking, oh, maybe I don't want to be by myself. I like the idea of being an introvert and being able to be in a space with other people who are not necessarily talking to me, but focus on creating, which is what I would be doing. And then I wouldn't have to be there alone. So I kept saying to myself, like, oh, this would be a dream. And so one day in June this year, the owner told me that a couple of people had left and asked me randomly, would I be interested in coming to be a part of the collective? Absolutely, I would. So I told my husband right away. He said, oh, you're doing it. And so that's how it came to be that I ended up in a studio.
Your gift just keeps making room. Each time it was an invitation.
It was. And I never thought about that. So I'm glad you said that.
I talk about that. I think I might have said it even earlier. I don't know if I said it on camera before about how we have a gift and it gets discovered. Like God put that gift in you. for you to share. There are those who are going to be encouraged or challenged, or even if it's just for you, even if his work is for you to share your gift for his purposes in you.
Oh, sure.
It just seems to keep widening for you. That's really neat. And so you said the studio is your happy place.
It is.
And I love that. It is.
It is.
You're still working in your corporate job.
I am.
Do you have a desire to make a switch for that to be what you do as your means of making a living? Or how do you see it right now? Well, who knows what it's going to do, because it's been moving you around on its own, right? But what are you thinking right now?
Yeah, so I think the current goal would be so I've only been there since July. I've been there since July. And the current goal is to get it to pay for itself.
Sure.
So I'd be happy with a 50-50 right now. Like, I'm not yet old enough to retire, and I still like my benefits. And actually, I still like being in corporate. I really do. Like, I love my job, as stressful as it can be sometimes. And I like the idea that I can go somewhere else and do something completely different. And so the studio allows me to have that. But ultimately, I would like to do that 100% of my time. If I could just wake up and paint every day, that would be wonderful. Wow. And maybe, that'll happen. I don't have any skin in the game of it having to happen in any, I'm just going to I feel like I'm going to let what has been happening happen. So if that is meant to be, then that will be what it is.
One of my favorite words, you seem to embody it, is freedom. It sounds like your creative process comes freely. You observe, or you get inspired, you have a story, and somehow something visual starts. And it's interesting to me, being one that's not done any visual art, and I love your pieces, and I do want to talk about the series about voice,
sure,
that we were looking at. And how does that connect with your personal story, where you are right now? I'm looking at pieces there. I know we filmed them earlier. I'm thinking about the first one has the lady with the typewriter at her mouth. And I remember mentioning that there's, looks like bricks behind and throughout the foundation of the photo. Can you tell me a little bit more about, first of all, I don't even know how to ask the question. Do you know it's a series when you start, or is every piece its own thing?
Wow. I think that I knew this one was a series when I realized I had not said everything I wanted to say with the initial piece. Okay. And to go back to one of the things you were talking about, I've sort of started to tell my story, my personal story, a little bit more with time. But I'm an adult adoptee is what we're considered. And when I was growing up, adoption is a lot more open now. Like, people talk more to their kids about it. They talk to other kids about it. But when I was growing up, it was a family secret. So I stood out in my family. We're all Black, but we don't look alike, or I don't look like them. It's probably a better way to say it. And so people would often, kids especially, would joke and say, "You must be adopted." And I could never say, "Well, yeah, I am," because my mom would have been upset. And so I carried a lot of heaviness within me for that reason. And it was a story, my own story.
It was your own story, but society placed shame around it.
Absolutely. And they still do. Like, there's still jokes about it. I saw a joke on TV not too long ago where someone's like, "I hate to tell you, but you're adopted." I'm like, we have this whole interesting thing in our society where it's viewed positively, but it's also still viewed negatively. And I would love for that part to go away, but it probably never will.
Well,
there's a stigma around that.
Continue to talk about it.
Yeah.
Stigma dissipates over time when courageous people tell their stories.
Yeah,
right?
That's true.
So I think I that's really neat. So I know that. So you took care of your father until his recent transition, and I wonder, will there be, even in his transition, another layer of release for you to tell your story? Not that he pushed it down, but that when there's shame attached to a story that really shouldn't carry any shame, but it's part of it. It was cultural and generational.
Oh, sure.
That not even really personal, but cultural and generational force that. So as that generation moves, transitions on, you have the opportunity, those that hear your story behind you,
Oh, sure.
to begin to change that. Would you say that those are your parents and you're grateful that they adopted you? You felt love in your family. They're your family.
Right, they are.
Yeah.
It's interesting, though, because I know when I was working on that piece, my dad never, ever, ever talked about me being adopted to anyone, but he had dementia. And so I found he started telling people about me being adopted, which was really weird because I kept thinking like, you and I have never talked about this. And here you are. And I felt like when I talked about the bricks in the back of that one piece, like there's this whole thing that has been being built, around my own personal life all these years. And now just having the freedom to tell that story and them not be hurt by my feelings about the story, because it doesn't mean that I wasn't cared about or loved or anything, but I also had my own feelings about a situation that I had no control over, nor could I tell it. Now I know I can. So.
Wow. Okay. So the bricks represent a kind of heaviness. The typewriter is the words, and you have it coming. I can't keep my eyes off. It's behind your head. I don't know if the cameras are going to catch it while we're talking. We did a little bit of filming earlier, and there were a couple of other pieces. Another one that I loved. I really like them all, but another one that I loved was again, a sketch of a very expressive face. You have a way with eyes that I think is really beautiful.
Thank you.
And expressions. And it talked about art is messy or messy is art. So something like that about the correlation or the relationship, I should say, between what is messy and unstructured and what is beautiful.
Thanks.
And that just sounds like your story.
Yeah, it is. It's
There's
my
some
story.
messiness in that.
It's my story, but it's a lot of people's
beautiful.
stories. Like everyone has a bit of maybe a messy story or a story that makes them uncomfortable or maybe other people uncomfortable, which is why I brought up the whole thing about Will and Jada. Like people are having a hard time in our society, not everyone, but having a difficult time with hearing them tell their story the way they want to tell their story. And so even, it's not messy to me. Just because it's messy to someone else. But the person who thinks it's messy doesn't want it to be told, which I just feel like that there's an unfairness in that people aren't hearing. And I talked to Chrissy. I don't know how to describe her, Vince's wife, about it. And we were talking about trauma sometimes that people may have, that when someone is telling their own story, it triggers something in them. And they won't admit that it's triggering something, but instead they say something nasty about the person telling the story, even when they don't know them. And sometimes I do feel like that will happen with me because I know that, for instance, there's people who are pro-adoption. They don't really want to hear the hard parts of that experience. But that doesn't make it not so. And it doesn't make that story not a valuable story to tell. And I think everyone's story is valuable. I think I can get something from anyone's story. Just like I feel like through my art, people are getting something from my story, even though sometimes they don't know what it is.
We were talking about that. That's what I love about art. You have, as the creator of that art, a perspective, a story you're telling. These things symbolize something very specific to you, even if it's emerging. And I bring my lens with my history and my traumas and my triggers to it. And there are those that are, I'm looking at your pieces, there are those that are challenging. Then there was one that I'm like, that's me right there. That's me right there. It was a woman with a key on her tongue,
Absolutely.
her voice being unlocked. And what I saw in her face, I don't know what you saw, but what I saw in her face was release. And I'm like, I see her. That looks like me right now. I feel like I am loosing my voice, letting it out and unlocking it. I don't even know what all I'm going to say or who's going to receive it.
That's right.
But that's not the for me at that space, at least, the recipient is not really the goal, the object.
Yeah, it's definitely not your responsibility for how it lands on someone.
Yeah.
It's not.
Yeah. Wow, we could go a whole therapeutic route with this. I love this. I love the idea, and that's what I hope to do, even in this space. Is someone's going to relate to what you just said. Someone's going to relate to your story. Someone's going to be inspired about it, and it may cause them to shake something up in their own life. Maybe my story does have value. Maybe they still have their tongue locked, and they just say, you know what? It does have value. It's mine to tell. It's to whom I want to tell it, even if it's the mirror, right?
Absolutely.
Whether it's the mirror or a million people. So I hope every now and then I get to hear how a podcast affected someone, or how a story inspired or challenged or related to someone. So I hope that I'll have the opportunity to hear, because I betcha, I feel confident that just your saying with such grace, everyone gets to tell their story the way they want to tell their story.
They do.
Sometimes it's heavy, and you don't have to like it, but you tell your own story your way you want to tell your story, right?
And you can plug your ears if you want. You don't have to listen
if you want. That's a good point. Wow. Well, we're going to close. We're going to have to close up the conversation. We may have to change this format to more than 30 minutes. I find that I feel like I have so many more questions before I'm done. You told me you liked mules.
I do.
I just tried to put a fall twist on a Moscow mule. So this is vodka, good grief, apple cider. Thank you. Apple cider, ginger beer, and a little bit of lime. That's all that it is. I garnished it with apple slice, cinnamon stick, and a couple of pomegranate seeds just to look pretty. So cheers to you.
Cheers.
Well, all right, good people. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Tales from the Shaker. I hope you heard something that was inspiring and causes you to shake some things up in your own life. Talk to you later.